Jack was tired, too tired, he thought, as he gripped the wheel, staring down a dark highway that stretched endlessly in front of him. For the past 3 days, he'd been on a business trip, traveling through one small town after another, closing deals and negotiating contracts. But tonight was different. The roads were empty, the towns farther and farther apart. He hadn't seen another car in over an hour. When he finally noticed the faint glow of a neon motel sign blinking in the distance, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was a nondescript building, only a handful of rooms, but he didn't care. Inside, the motel lobby was dim, with one flickering fluorescent light casting long shadows across the outdated furniture. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged man, hunched over, flipping through an old magazine. He looked up as Jack entered, his gaze cold and distant. Checking in, the man asked in a low voice. Jack nodded, barely able to keep his eyes open. Just for one night, any room will do. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he seemed to hesitate, his hand lingering over a key on the rack behind him. After a moment, he pulled down the key marked Room 17 and slid it across the counter without a word. Jack noticed the man's hand trembling slightly as he took the key, but he was too tired to question it. Room 17 was at the end of a long, narrow hallway. Jack shuffled down the corridor, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. Most of the other rooms were dark, their doors shut tight. The faint smell of mildew hung in the air, mingling with a trace of something else, something metallic, like rust. As Jack unlocked the door to Room 17, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The room was small, plain, and slightly dated. The bedspread was a dull shade of green, and the carpet was worn thin in places, but it was quiet, and at that moment, that was all he needed. He tossed his bag onto the bed, kicked off his shoes, and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. When he turned on the light in the bathroom, he noticed the mirror was fogged up, as though someone had taken a hot shower moments before. Strange, he thought. He wiped it down, but the fog seemed to reappear as soon as he turned away. Too tired to think much of it, he splashed some water on his face and decided it was time to sleep. Around midnight, Jack was jolted awake by a strange sound of faint scratching, like fingernails dragging against a wooden surface. He opened his eyes, trying to orient himself. The room was dark, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then it hit him in Room 17. As he lay there, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, the scratching grew louder, echoing from somewhere near the bathroom. Jack sat up slowly, his heart beating. He strained to listen, but the sound had stopped. A deep silence settled over the room, deciding he was just on edge from exhaustion. Jack got up and walked to the bathroom. He turned on the light and was immediately struck by something that made his blood run cold. There, written in shaky letters across the fogged-up mirror, were the words, "Leave before midnight." He stumbled back, gripping the edge of the sink for support. He hadn't seen anyone in the room. No one could have entered without him noticing, but there it was, clear as day. He wiped the mirror, hoping it was a trick of the light, a stain, or some kind of prank, but the words remained, even after he wiped them away, reappearing each time the fog settled. A creeping sense of dread took hold of him, but he convinced himself it was just a prank, maybe the clerk having a laugh at the new guest. But then, as he walked back toward the bed, he heard another sound, this time a faint, whispered voice, barely audible, as though someone was speaking just inches from his ear. Jack froze, trying to make out the words, but they were incomprehensible, a soft murmur just on the edge of his hearing. He was fully awake now, every nerve on edge. The clock beside the bed read 12:20 a.m. His instinct screamed at him to leave, but his pride and fatigue fought back. He couldn't let himself be scared off by what was probably some cheap motel prank. Ignoring the prickling sensation creeping up his spine, Jack lay back down, pulling the covers over himself. He closed his eyes, determined to get some rest, but the silence didn't last long. Minutes later, the scratching began again, louder this time, as if someone or something was inside the walls. Unable to ignore it any longer, Jack decided to confront the night clerk about the strange occurrences. Throwing on his jacket, he stepped out of room 17, only to find the hallway empty and dark, the silence oppressive. When he reached the lobby, he was surprised to find it deserted. No one sat behind the desk. No one answered his calls. The place felt abandoned. Desperate, he ventured outside to the parking lot, hoping to clear his head. But when he looked back toward room 17, he noticed something odd. The curtains in his room were open, and there was a shadowy figure standing in the window. Watching him, Jack's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't left the lights on, and no one else had a key. His mind raced, heart pounding as he debated running for his card and leaving immediately. But then he remembered his belongings were still in the room, stealing himself. Jack approached room 17 cautiously. As he unlocked the door and entered, he found the room exactly as he'd left it. No sign of the shadowy figure, no open curtains, just his belongings and the eerie silence. Shaking, he gathered his things, ready to leave. Just as he was about to step outside, the door slammed shut on its own. Jack was trapped, feeling a chill as he turned and saw a shadow forming near the bed. The figure moved closer, its shape becoming clearer. A man, faceless with hollow eyes staring into nothingness. Jack's body froze in place, the air around him thick and suffocating. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, he darted towards the door, yanking it open and stumbling out into the hallway. He didn't look back as he sprinted to his car, heart pounding, the shadowy figure's presence haunting his every step. He tore out of the parking lot, only feeling safe once he saw the motel disappear in his rearview mirror. As he drove, his heart began to calm. He reached into his pocket, planning to call someone, anyone, to tell them what had happened. But as he pulled out his phone, something fell out with it, something he didn't remember picking up. It was a business card, yellowed and worn, with a strange symbol etched into it. The symbol was unfamiliar, and the only word written beneath it was a name, M. Blackwell. Jack felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he didn't know where the card had come from. But one thing was certain. Room 17 had left him with more questions than answers.